Hello everyone. This lecture is on culture, consumption and politics. It is a part of your paper on media, culture and society. In this lecture, we will learn about how there is a diffusion of cultural elements that blurs the distinction between what we call as elite culture and mass culture. This is made possible through a kind of politics wherein a process of hybridization of cultural elements takes place. We'll also learn how, apart from monetary investments, the consumers also invest their emotions while acquiring commodities for their own consumption. You will learn through this lecture the logic of the media and the market to create the desire for consumption. At the end of this lecture, you will be in a position to evaluate how needs are manufactured through images and how we get engaged in the practices of consumption. And that, apart from money, the role of emotions or the subjective aspect of consumption. Let us begin. Use value and exchange value. Understanding politics of consumption. Have you ever wondered why people consume things or commodities? Or how to understand the consumption behavior and practices of individuals? The answer to these questions lies in recognizing the fact that there are certain values that are attached to the things or commodities. Here, value does not refer to the price of the products. Value is not necessarily inscribed on them. In this context, value refers to the layers of meanings, particularly ideological meanings that an individual attaches to the commodity or thing, which makes it more desirable. To understand this, we need to understand the consumption practices through the concept of use value and exchange value associated with commodities. According to Karl Marx, the usefulness of a thing is defined by its utility and capability to satisfy the needs required for existence of human beings. This explains the use value. Exchange value, on the other hand, is associated with manufactured or created needs of the human beings designed by the society. In the context of exchange value, the consumption of goods represents the social existence of things. In other words, use value expresses the natural relationship between a thing and human beings, and exchange value signifies the cultural aspect of this relationship. For example, food to satisfy the hunger of human being is a natural relationship, but goods like expensive watches that one wears keeping others in mind, like peer group, and manufactured needs created by the society. Media plays a crucial role in creating such values of commodities, especially through advertisements. For example, people prefer purchasing branded clothes and watches not because of their utility value, rather for its aesthetics and to declare their social status. Such an activity is in complete contrast to a generalized use value of a commodity. However, it should not imply that the branded clothes do not have utility. Rather, the idea is to analyze how the desire for branded things are created by the media. It should also not indicate that the lower class people are excluded from the consumption of such goods. For example, individuals belonging to the lower class who cannot purchase a bottle of shampoo can afford to have a sachet of the same shampoo. A false consciousness is created among the minds of the consumers that they can have beautiful hair like that of any celebrity endorsing the shampoo, and as such there is no class difference between the celebrity and the audience, as the latter has the access to the same shampoo, though in the form of a sachet. This is how the media and the market works together to include all within the discourse of consumerism. This is what can be understood as politics of consumption, where an attempt is made to include everyone in the consumption processes, trying to be homogeneous, yet a subtle attempt is always there to segregate the population in terms of their purchasing power. It is in this sense we need to understand politics of consumption. Politics here refers to a mode of activity which aims to bring about change in distribution of power and resources, where people feel to be a part of the market. This is done by providing affordable prices of expensive products through their miniature forms, discount sales of branded clothes, and at the same time politics also refers to the maintenance of an established order and hierarchy, where people having less purchasing power are excluded from acquiring many of the products, so that a distinction is always maintained. Bhaskar Mukhopadhyay calls into question such dichotomy between that of use value and exchange value. According to him, one needs to move beyond the utility perspective of use value of commodities and explore the social construction of use value of things. He argues that looking at things objectively through their properties of utility is itself a kind of social construction. In contemporary society, things are mostly seen in terms of both aesthetics of beauty and political economy or exchange value. In order to understand how desires for consumption are created, he gives an example of an event that took place in 2011 in Calcutta, now Kolkata. There was a rumor that due to lifting of restrictions on import of foreign goods, there will be availability of cheap Chinese goods to the villagers. For them, it was a gift or daan of globalization that is bestowed upon them. The Chinese bicycle was seen as a commodity, as it involved monetary transaction, and also a gift, since it is produced by exchange between villagers and the process of globalization. They considered globalization to be a process where the educated white people wanted the underprivileged Indians to enjoy the benefits of quality consumer goods as used by them. Though there was massive circulation of messages that foreign culture and goods will pollute the Indian culture, the villagers did a cultural rationalization of the Chinese bicycles by considering it to be a dan or gift. They contrasted it with another category of goods, which they called in Bengali as khairati or alms giving. That includes the relief materials given by the government agencies after any natural calamity like cyclone, floods, etc. Thus, new desires were created for foreign goods by rationalizing it to be a gift and not any alms given activity. Desire for commodity leads us to a discussion on the subjective aspect of consumption, where emotions appear to be stronger in order to acquire a product. Let us discuss this in detail: libidinal investment and consumption practices. Apart from use value and exchange value, another key concept in understanding the politics of consumption is libidinal investment. It refers to a strong attachment to a thing or a commodity based on one's desire, wants, and emotions. There is not always an economic aspect or the purchasing power related to this consumption. Rather, a psychological investment is also equally present. There might not be a need for a particular commodity to an individual, but a strong emotion that he or she attaches to the commodity persuades him or her to purchase the commodity. Libidinal investment can be better understood by taking into consideration the manners of the individuals. In this context, manners are not to be understood to be something which is disciplined through power regimes. Rather, how desires control or manipulate the behavior of individuals in making and strengthening the fetish character of the commodity. It implies that the consumers are not necessarily governed citizens, but as Partha Chatterjee mentions in his book The Politics of the Governed, consumers are free citizens of civil society. The emphasis on free citizens needs to be substantiated further. He makes a distinction between population and the citizen. The former comes under the purview of the policy makers for the purpose of governmentality, whereas the latter is identified with the civil society, that is, all those social institutions that lie outside the domain of state control. Since they do not come under the direct purview of the state, they engage on making claims on the state and questioning the practices of governmentality exercised by the state. Consequently, this becomes a political society that emerges primarily from traditional institutions like family, kinship, and neighborhood. Caste becomes one of the important factors in regulating the manners in these institutions guided by dharma or righteousness. The self is created by following the mores and manners, which is completely outside the domain of the state. In another context, Partha Chatterjee points out that there are basically two domains of an individual's life in India. First, the material or public, and second, the spiritual or the private realm. According to him, the colonial rule in India could somewhat change the public realm, but was faced with protest and criticisms when it tried to change the inner domain of an individual. It was this private or inner domain that was nurtured by Mahatma Gandhi to construct political spirituality and nationalism through the use of Swadeshi goods. Also, by focusing on bodily practices like fasting, yoga, vegetarianism, celibacy, and abstinence, he was able to mobilize a large number of people for anti-colonial struggle. The masses were mobilized as these issues could be easily connected with their inner realm. Another glaring example of this was consumption of khadi clothes woven by them. This is how emotions work in regulating the consuming behavior through the manners. These manners are imbibed and so deeply ingrained in one's mind that they become more of a reflex action rather than conscious strategy or action to define oneself and identity. Politics of production and consumption. The politics of consumption cannot be understood without taking into consideration the politics involved in production of culture through images, moving pictures, objects, arts, and artifacts. The idea of defining culture as that belonging to upper or lower class no longer holds true. There has been an intermixture of cultural elements which blurs the boundaries between elite culture and popular or folk culture. The consumption of culture takes place through everyday politics in Indian society. Bhaskar Mukhopadhyay here points out that there has been an incorporation of vernacular and folk traditions in the making of a progressive secular pan-Indian modern culture. As we discussed, individuals hold themselves close to the inner realm, and media takes elements from this private realm onto the screen in art and in paintings, which makes the objects more desirable. Now, television and politics of reception. Arvind Rajagopal's ethnography on television and politics in India defines the agents of the television in mobilizing the public into a homogeneous audience. They were mobilized through a discourse on consumerism. Television exploits the images of commodities to propagate its ideologies. It would then not be wrong to say that the values that individuals attach to the things have several layers of ideological meanings invested into them. For example, if we look at the advertisements of washing machine, it creates an illusion that the work for the women gets eased out due to technology. However, it also reinforces or strengthens the ideology that household chores like washing clothes or dishes are supposed to be done by the women. It does not question the gender division of labor that takes place within the confines of our homes. Similarly, Melissa Butcher's ethnographical work, Transnational Television, Cultural Identity and Change, when Star came to India, focuses on the role of transnational television in the process of redefining the notion of Indianness. Her work discusses the issue of identity formation through the television. Through interviews at television studios, review of various newspapers and magazine articles, and focus group discussions in urban metropolises like Delhi and Bangalore, she establishes that layers of Indian identity which is not mutually exclusive. She looks at televisual representations as providing the limitations, defining the boundaries of identifying with these layers of identity. According to her, identity re-evaluation takes place at 4 different levels, that is, through state, market, religious cultural sphere and among audiences. She proves that at each of these levels there is a motive to establish an order and avoid any possibility of a disorder to the situation. This is basically what is meant by politics of production, where media attempts to maintain a social order by creating an illusion of being inclusive in nature. Production of art and consumption practices. In terms of art, Piney points out that image of deities needs to be understood through a performative dimension. The images give an impression of giving darshan to their devotees. Darshan basically refers to the exchange of glances between the deity, read here as image, and the devotee. Piney stresses that the deities appear more real due to usage of oil painting and modern technology. It, in a way, compels or facilitates the prospective buyer to purchase the image or idol of the deity due to an emotional or libidinal investment being involved in it. Similarly, Jane Brower, in his article The Communicating Goddesses of the Artisans, demonstrates that the image or idol provides a symbolic link between the goddess and the artisans. The artisans organize their everyday activity, establish their collective identity, and maintain their pattern of business transaction through the symbolic effectiveness of the goddess. Cinema, folk culture and consumption. In India, the post-liberalization era witnessed the breakdown of barriers between high culture and low culture. For example, popular Hindi films have been successful in marginalizing Hollywood in India. It has also created a niche for itself in several other parts of the developing world. Bhaskaran points out that the hegemony of Hindi films, however, was a failure and was challenged with the growth of film culture in southern part of India. Hindi popular films have been able to sustain itself against Hollywood as it has created an aura of a nation space through incorporation of elements of nationality, modernity, spirituality, traditionality, and revolutionary. Anything and everything which would connote a kind of Indianness on the screen. One of the pertinent question is, how did the Hindi popular cinema came to acquire an Indian identity? Kapoor and Raj Dhaksha put forth the concept of frontality or iconicity to understand the popularity of Hindi cinema. Frontality basically refers to the frontal address surfaces like the images on the screen, which tries to articulate the mythic elements and motives as visuals on the screen. The audience tries to relate to such images on the basis of his or her previous social experiences. Iconicity conveys the idea of darshan, which means an exchange of glances between the protagonist on the screen and the audience. It is a kind of divine feeling for the audience where he or she feels that the main protagonist is looking at him or her. These two concepts capture the phenomena of reception of cinema, wherein a politics of production is also involved to ensure passive or active consumption. If we look at instances of how folk culture is incorporated into Hindi cinema, we may understand how the private or the inner realm is exploited to draw audiences to engage intensely with the cinema. It is a well-established truism that every region has its own traditional folk culture. Media plays an important role in creating a hybridized form of the folk culture. Apart from media, other factors like tourism, consumerism, print, and film culture are equally responsible for the dilution of the folk culture. For example, Hindi and other regional films create their songs and dances sequences mostly inspired and incorporating elements of folk culture. In fact, Bhaskar Mukhopadhyay argues that cinema is made to appear more Indian by including the folk elements, which are readily or immediately identifiable by the audiences as the materials are drawn from their everyday practices and performances. Through such an activity of incorporating and creating a hybridized folk culture, the folk no longer remains confined to the realm or the private or sacred. It becomes a matter of public spectacle, performance, and representation. There is no longer fetishism of the commodity as Marx believed, rather what Mukhopadhyay calls as commoditization of fetish. That is, something which was considered to be sacred and seen with respect and awe is shifted to the public domain. For example, ritual worship of gods or idols in the private confines of the home and temples gets into the public domain through the reproduction of deities, images, and idols in the form of pictures, calendars, and statues, which are made available in the market for sale. To sum up, culture is interwoven into the practices of production and consumption. The politics around these practices gives a picture of bringing about changes in the social order and at the same time trying to maintain an established order in the society. This was evident through the analysis of social constructedness of both use and exchange value of things. We also discussed that the value of things is determined not by its price, but also through the emotional investment one does on the commodities. At the end of this lecture, you have learned that the politics involved in production that makes consumption possible. It includes a strategic use of the elements of the inner realm, which is immediately identified by the consumers and thus makes things ready for consumption. We find this process of incorporation and hybridization in cultural forms like television, programs, art, painting, and the cinema. Interestingly, the commodity does not become sacred. Rather, the sacredness is invested into the commodity and as such is commodified. Hope you have enjoyed this lecture and it has been informative. For more details, please read the modules carefully and attempt the questions given at the end of each module. Thank you.